At Facebook, we've taken critical steps to prepare for the U.S. elections. We've more than tripled our safety and security teams, implemented 5-step ad verification, and launched a new voting information center. Learn more at fb.com/about/elections.
President Trump is being treated after testing positive for the coronavirus. The news is sending shockwaves through Washington just weeks before the presidential election.
This both grounds him for the time being. We don't exactly know yet how long he will be off the trail. And it also forces all of the nation's attention back onto the virus.
We'll have more on the latest developments and the impact going forward. Plus, the September jobs report shows a slowdown in hiring and growing long-term unemployment. It's Friday, October 2nd. I'm Anne-Marie Fertoli for The Wall Street Journal. Here's what's news. Let's jump right into our main story today. The White House said late this afternoon that President Trump is being moved to Walter Reed Medical Center out of an abundance of caution after he and First Lady Melania Trump tested positive for the coronavirus. The president is expected to work from his presidential office there for the next few days. The news that the president had tested positive ricocheted across the nation after he tweeted the diagnosis overnight. For more, we turn now to White House reporter Catherine Lucy. Hi, Catherine. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey there, great to be here.
So, Catherine, we've been tracking the president's movements over what's been a pretty busy week of traveling. What can you tell us about who he's been in contact with and what kind of contact tracing is now going on to determine who else within his circle might be impacted?
Yeah, it's really an extensive list of travels and people that he's come in contact with. So if you think back over the weekend, he held an event in the Rose Garden last Saturday to announce his Supreme Court nominee, Amy Coney Barrett. That was a crowded event, a lot of lawmakers, other top political allies in the Rose Garden, very little mask wearing. Then on Tuesday, the president went to the first presidential debate against Democrat Joe Biden. He traveled out there to Cleveland with campaign aides, staff, and a big group of family members, a number of his adult children. They were all in the audience, not wearing masks. Then on Wednesday, he traveled to Minnesota, where he had a private fundraiser and a outdoor rally in Duluth, which was a big and crowded event with limited mask wearing. And then on Thursday, he traveled to Bedminster, New Jersey for another private fundraiser. He's come into contact with a very long list of White House aides, of political supporters, of donors. The White House says that they are now going through contact tracing and alerting people who should get tested or should quarantine. We know, a number of top aides have publicly released their testing information. So we know that the vice president says that he tested negative. Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, who are top White House aides, have said they tested negative. Joe Biden, who obviously shared a debate stage with him earlier this week, said he tested negative. So we're getting some of that information as well. But yes, it is a large cast of people who could have come into contact with him.
Catherine, we are, of course, in the final weeks of the presidential election. How is this going to impact President Trump's campaigning and efforts to get out the vote in the final days? You've already mentioned some cancellations and reconfiguring the schedule here.
This is a huge rupture in the campaign, 30 plus days out from Election Day. The president's strategy heading into this final stretch was twofold. One was to aggressively campaign. His plan was to spend a huge amount of time in battleground states, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, in Florida, in Arizona, doing multiple rallies and events a day, really, really torching the earth in those locations. He was also really looking to shift his messaging away from the coronavirus to other issues, including the economy, including the Supreme Court. This both grounds him for the time being. We don't exactly know yet how long he will be off the trail. And it also forces all of the nation's attention back onto the virus.
And how about the Biden campaign? What else have we heard from the campaign about how their strategy might be changing, especially heading into next week's vice presidential debate and then the next presidential debate after that?
Well, what we know for now is that Biden has been tested. He said that his campaign released a statement from a doctor saying that both he and his wife, Jill Biden, had tested negative, and that he is continuing on with some campaign activities. He was heading to Michigan today. So we know that he is continuing, but I think this shifts focus away from some of those campaign activities. So one thing that we'll have to watch for is, does he adjust his schedule in the coming days, or does it affect his messaging?
And we should also note that vice presidential nominee Kamala Harris has tested negative for the coronavirus. Catherine, President Trump joins a growing list of world leaders who have contracted the virus. How do you think he will handle this? We've seen him at times downplaying the seriousness of the disease. Do you think this is going to change the messaging coming from the White House? And might he take any tips from other world leaders who have contracted the disease on how to handle this?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think we have to see how he speaks about this and tweets about this in the coming days. Certainly, so far, throughout the year, the president has at times downplayed the significance of the virus and has at times, not worn masks consistently, has not offered consistent messaging around sort of public health precautions and mask wearing. For now, I mean, he is focused, the statements he has made on saying, he is fine and that he will recover. I think it's hard to know if this is drastically going to shift how he's going to talk about it. And it's sort of too early to tell right now. I think we have to see how this unravels.
How do you think it might impact voters, especially those who are undecided at this point? Is this something that could elicit more sympathy for the president's plight, or perhaps anger over that inconsistent messaging about the coronavirus pandemic?
It's a fair question. The one thing we've seen throughout this year, though, is that despite any number of massive and disruptive events, from a global pandemic to widespread protests over racial justice, the Supreme Court nomination, this past week we had new revelations about the president's tax payments. Very few things have drastically shifted polling. And what we're seeing is that most people have made up their minds. It's a very small slice of truly undecided voters that are up for grabs at this point. So it's not entirely clear that this is drastically going to change the terrain. It does, though, make it harder for the president to do the kind of aggressive closing pitch that he was going to do. And one question is, does that affect the state of play?
And if his condition becomes more serious, what happens? Could there be a temporary transfer of the duties of his office? And how would that work?
Certainly for right now, no one at the White House is talking about any kind of transfer of power. They're being very clear that his symptoms are mild, that he is very energetic, that he is still fully engaged in the day's work. But yes, if his condition was to worsen, he could temporarily transfer power to Vice President Mike Pence under the 25th Amendment. Now, that's only happened 3 times in U.S. history, when Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush underwent colonoscopies. There were other times when Ronald Reagan was shot and had to undergo emergency surgery in 1981. Power wasn't actually formally transferred. So we'd have to see how that will unfold.
Wall Street Journal White House reporter Catherine Lucy. Catherine, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
For our full coverage of this developing story, head to WSJ.com or the WSJ app. After the break, we'll talk more about the final jobs report before Election Day.
Avalara has been pioneering sales tax automation with cloud-based solutions since 2004. That's why businesses of all sizes turn to Avalara for real-time rate calculation, automatic return filing, and certificate management. Avalara automatically integrates with more than 700 ERP and e-commerce systems, likely what you use today. Find out how your business can save time and reduce risk at avalara.com/WSJ. That's avalara.com/WSJ. Avalara, tax compliance done right.
The president's diagnosis and the release of the September jobs report this morning rattled U.S. stocks. Our markets reporter Amrith Ramkumar has more.
Traders are really concerned that these cross-currents could cause fresh volatility between now and November's election in the next month or so. People are extremely worried about the prospect of a contested election outcome or a delayed result due to widespread mail-in voting. Until Congress potentially passes any coronavirus stimulus, people really expect this volatility we've seen lately to continue. The S&P 500 is about 6% below its all-time high hit last month, and it's really been swinging up and down a lot during the day. People think that trend will continue in the weeks ahead, particularly as more news comes out about how the election schedule might change potentially and how debates and other events like that might be impacted.
The Dow dropped more than 400 points in early trading, but regained much of that loss by the close. The blue chips index ended the day down 134 points, or about 0.5%. The S&P lost 1%, and the Nasdaq fell more than 2%. The September jobs report, the last one we'll see before Election Day, shows that hiring gains are slowing and more layoffs are becoming permanent. 661,000 jobs were added to the U.S. economy last month. It's the first time since the recovery began that job gains have fallen below 1 million. The unemployment rate fell to 7.9%. Our labor and economics reporter Eric Morath says the long-term unemployment numbers are troubling.
We're seeing that more than half of workers have been unemployed, of those that are unemployed, have been unemployed for more than 3 months. And now almost 20% have been unemployed for more than 6 months. And then that's a big worry because we saw this play out after the 2007 to 2009 recession, where people lose their jobs and they really struggle to get back into the workforce. It took for some a decade to find their way back, and that weighs on consumer spending, that weighs on consumer confidence, and that's really the lifeblood of the U.S. economy. So while it's good that there's hiring, while it's good that the unemployment rate is still declining, the fact that those that are remaining unemployed are doing so for a long time rather than cycling in and out of the labor force, that's a big worry for economists.
The U.S. has now replaced 11.4 million of the 22 million jobs lost in March and April. In the final weeks of the presidential campaign, Eric says the jobs report has elements that both the Trump and Biden campaigns will seek to use to their advantage.
The administration today was touting that now more than half of jobs lost due to the pandemic have come back, and that there was fairly strong hiring last month in places like restaurants and retailers that had lost a lot of jobs, and manufacturing, which is something that the president has touted as a strong point for his term in office, had very good hiring last month. I think the Biden campaign will probably talk about some of these other aspects, that long-term unemployment is on the rise, job growth is slowing. We still have lost more jobs due to this downturn than we lost at the peak of the 2007 to 2009 crisis. So I think that would be something that the Biden campaign would point out, that we're already in Washington here pulling back on stimulus, pulling back on benefits, and we haven't really even got to the point where the last recession started.
And that's what's news for this week. Our hosts are me, Anne-Marie Fertoli, and Mark Stewart. The show was produced this week with help from Paolo Bossanen, Mark Garrison, Amanda Llewellyn, Trinae Nori, Charlie Turner, Sam Westron, J.R. Whalen, and Chris Sinsley. We'll be back on Monday morning. Thanks for listening.